Okay, we're back for part two of the video, second part of the video. So, what we have is a completed model, and I was remiss in that I didn't explicitly name the model in the first video, but of course, this is what is known as the circular flow model. And let me just write it up here. Circular flow model. And it kind of makes sense, right? It's circular, and there's two flows that we talked about: the monetary flow, which includes spending from households, which turns into revenue, which becomes payments, and then income, and then the flow of stuff, or real flow of, inputs, which become outputs, then become the goods and services, and then, of course, the resources. What I want to do is just amplify a couple of things in the second video for your understanding. The first is the definition here of resources. We need to talk a little bit more about that because there's more to that. Economists, if you think about the resources needed to make anything, automobiles, homes, apartments, there's just tons and tons of inputs, tons of resources needed to do something like that. So what economists have done is they've conveniently taken all of those resources and clumped them into four groups. All right. So I'm just going to spell them out down here. And there's a kind of it sounds very sort of 19th or 18th century, industrial revolutionary kind of term called factors of production. Factors of production, which is just a fancy term for resources, right? And so the four categories of resources that economists use, the first is labor, and that's really kind of any human endeavor, right? So if humans, that's an O. Okay, all right. If you're gonna be picky about it, no, that's not much better. Labor. Sorry, my handwriting sucks. Again, any human endeavor. Okay. Next is land, and land is just a title for any natural resource. So anything that occurs naturally. So it could be wood, timber, oil, precious metals, gold, silver, uranium. You know, literally land, hay, anything again that's naturally occurring. Next is capital. And capital is something usually human made that's used in the production of an output. So the easiest way to think about capital is things like robots, pizza ovens, and a snow cone stand, that machine that you put the ice on and shave the ice with, that's capital. Computers that are used, again, in the production of goods and services, those are all capital, okay? We also talk about financial capital in some economics classes. In this video right here, I'm going to exclude financial capital. So I'm not talking about money per se. I'm talking about economic capital. Again, things like pizza ovens and buildings and things like that. The third is entrepreneurship. I can't get the whole word on that. Entrepreneurship. And really, the best way to understand entrepreneurship is really it's a combination of two things. The first part is sort of the idea, the creative part, okay, but then the second part is the action and the risk. So it's not simply just coming up with great ideas. It's actually taking the risk and putting those ideas out to fruition. And sometimes entrepreneurship is incredible because it leads to whole new categories of things that we didn't even know existed. Hell, I didn't know in the late 90s I'd have something called an iPhone, and that I would no longer have to carry a Rand McNally map book in my car. And sometimes, entrepreneurship is not glamorous and not sexy. Something as simple as reinventing paper clips or mousetrap or something like that. So anyway, that's what's meant by resources. So all of those resources again, are included by factors of production. Hey, from me to you, if you use this term, next time you're at a cocktail party and you're in a little group talking and eating your liver pate and sneak that into the conversation, and you'll automatically be the smartest person in the room. All right, three more things I want to just point out to you with this model. Okay, the first is if I kind of take and sort of bisect the model in half this way, and we just focus our attention on the top half of the model, right? We call that the goods market. Now, why is it a goods market? Well, first of all, let's talk about markets. What's it take to have a market? It takes a couple things, right? It takes a buyer and a seller, and they have to agree upon price and quantity. That's what it takes to have a market. Well, so looking up here, it's easy to identify the buyer because that's what you do, like we talked about before, right? All the time. So households in the goods market, households are the buyer, and then of course it's easy to identify the seller because places like Walmart and Target, Costco, are the firms that act as sellers for what? For stuff, for goods, the goods and services that we talked about. That's why it's called the goods market, right? Because the buyer's buying the goods. Of course, the seller's selling them, but I could call it the output market because output's just another term for the stuff, but goods market, okay? So when we talk about the goods market, that's what we're talking about. But check this out. Here's one that you may not, be used to thinking about unless you've owned your own business. What about down here? Is there a market down here? Yeah, it turns out there is, right? We call this the resource market. Resource market. This is a market also, right? Now, who's the buyer in the resource market? Well, who's buying the resources? Firms are. Firms are the buyer. And we already talked about the fact that one of the most important things they buy is your labor, okay? So households become the seller, and that's what you do when you take a job, right? You literally are selling your labor in the resource market to a firm. And the price of that labor, or it's called wages or income. So in fact, that is a market, and it's called the resource market. Again, I could substitute just different names for the stuff. I could call it the resource market, I could call it the input market, I could call it the factors market, because that's just all different names for the same stuff. But there you go. Finally, let's talk about this. Now, this is a mess, I know, and I apologize for it being so sloppy, but what about the government? Is that a market? Well, in order to be a market, right, it has to have a buyer and a seller, and they have to agree upon price and quantity. And that's not the dynamic that exists here. There's not a buyer in this model, in this case, right? Because look what happens. Firms and households are mandatorily giving the government taxes, and a market can never be coerced. Okay, and taxes can. The government can force you to pay taxes. That's how they got Al Capone, right? Tax evasion. So in this case, because it's coerced, and because there isn't a buyer or seller per se, agreeing on price and quantity, this is not a market. Okay, but there's the circular flow model. And powerful. I'll probably come back to some element, if not all of this, in later videos. And it's just a really, really good way to understand not only the U.S. economy, but every major modern economy. Yeah. So that does it for the circular flow model. Let's see what else we can talk about.